have 2 days of instruction. Sometimes that will bleed into the third day, depending on what we've been able to cover, what we haven't been able to cover. The third day, we will do report writing. Hopefully you have some ideas of reports you're interested in writing. We can build those together. I've been told that you guys are going to kind of work as teams. Hopefully that's the case. Because with this large of a crowd, it's hard for me to get around for individual people. Every day we're going to take 30 minutes for lunch. Lunch will be provided, I have been told. So we won't be doing a 60-minute lunch because I've had that happen and people just sit around twiddling their thumbs for about 45 minutes. We'll take about a 15-minute break midway between now and lunch, and same thing in the afternoon. In the afternoon I might throw in some extra 5-10-minute breaks just because after lunch everybody's kind of in that food coma. You kind of need to get up, get some coffee, get some caffeine, stretch those legs. And, you know, I try and keep this pretty casual. If you have a question, just ask. You know, it's really important that people understand this. If you aren't getting something, or if you're getting an error, if we're doing something and you get an error, or you can't figure out why it is, tell me to stop, let's figure it out. You know, a lot of times I can go through this information and I might speed up a little bit and I may not realize it. Just tell me to slow down. Okay. Said I've been doing this for over a year, so sometimes it's just second nature. And you just type this and you do this. For example, the last training I did, you know, one of our keywords is ROWS, R-O-W-S. And I actually got in a little bit of a back and forth with the client. I said, she's like, what do you mean rows? I typed in rows and it doesn't work. I'm like, how can you know? Rows, you just type in rows. She's like, right, I'm typing in rows. And yeah, she was typing in the flower rows. I'm like, okay. But it's that little communication. Sometimes things are like that and you're like, okay, R-O-W-S. And you know, you don't think of these things. And that was the first time I had anybody say, why am I typing in a flower? What? I don't know what you're talking about. We're going to break this up into 4 modules, I believe. Okay. The first one is just some foundational concepts. We're going to go through this pretty quickly because I've been told you actually have done a lot of the pre-training, right? Everybody did the pre-training? Yes. Understand cell referencing, understand kind of the idea of the database and how it works, but it seems like once you know one database, you kind of know how they're really structured. The hardest part of this class is going to be really finding information. I think the concepts of JET are pretty easy. You know, once you understand the various functions and what they do, it's just a matter of finding the data, and that's where people have the hardest time. So Module 1 is just going to be kind of a quick review of that information. Module 2, we're going to get into creating a mockup, because what we want to do is not actually just teach you how to use JET. We want to give you a process to actually write reports, to be successful. So we're not going to just jump right in and start, here's what you do. You type in this, and you do this, and you do that. No. We're going to create a roadmap. We're going to call it our mockup. So that way, whenever we're confused about a report, or we need to know what it is we're after, we can go back to our roadmap and say, oh, okay, this is what I'm after. This is the ultimate goal. Once we create our mockup, we'll create our little options page. Makes no sense right now, but it will. Once we get into Module 3, that's when we're going to start really building our reports. Okay, we're going to talk about our various functions that are introduced, and we are going to talk about the 2 types of dynamic lists that we can create. And Module 4, we're going to take it a step further. We're going to take our basic reports and expand them into something a little bit more robust, a little bit more common, because Module 3 is about building basic reports. Now in our book, which everybody should have if you don't have one, we're going to do examples together, okay? And then there's going to be exercises for you to work on as we go through this. The exercises you're going to do on your own, and you'll find that there's various types. There's inventory, there's finance, there's all kinds of stuff. We're going to want you to choose the one that sounds most interesting to you. Now there may be times where I say, you know what, don't do this one, or choose one of these 2, just to save on time. The nice thing is, if you want practice with this, right, you'll have your computers with your laptops, you'll have the database, so if you want to spend some time tonight or tomorrow morning practicing, you can go back and do some of those ones that we didn't cover. Okay? But we're going to try and cover various types of reporting. In our Acronis database, our receivables, we're going to deal with our customers and customer ledger entry. Our GL, we're going to deal with our GL account, GL entry. Inventory, item ledger entry, payables, vendor ledger entry. Hopefully people see a pattern here. Typically if you see entry, that's our transactional level detail. And if we don't see that, that's pretty much our master table. Okay. So we need to kind of understand that, and I think that was covered in the pre-training, this idea of a master table and a transactional level table. So module 1, let's just kind of jump right in. I'm going to go ahead and sit down. We're going to talk about the 4 functions. We're going to talk about users and their roles, the various modes. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through that JET ribbon real quick. We'll just quickly talk about those and see what's in there. The 4 functions that are introduced when we install JET are the NL, the NF, the NP, and the GL. The NL is kind of your bread and butter. Right? Let's see. I don't know what page this is on, so let's page 3. All right. Perfect. The NL is our bread and butter. This is the one we use most often, although you finance people will probably use the GL function quite a bit. So we don't necessarily cover the GL function in our book, but I will make sure we talk about it on day 3. Okay? Typically on day 3, we'll spend about an hour, hour and a half, kind of going over some extra concepts, things we didn't get to. GL is definitely one because I know we've got a few finance people in here, and it is something that's really important for you guys to understand because it makes your life much easier and it reports much faster. So the NL is one we're going to use most. And most people always ask, well, what do these stand for? So I know what they mean. You don't really need to know what they mean, but NL actually stands for Navision Link. This is going to link to our database and it's going to do something for us. Right. I used to think of it as a new list or new line because in the early days of JET, that's what it did. It would bring back records and just create new lists of things. But really, it's connecting to the database and bringing back information, hence Navision Link. The NF is kind of a helper function. Right? We typically always use it in conjunction with an NL function. And we'll see that once we start talking about our second type of dynamic list, we'll see how the NF function works. And the NF stands for Navision Field. You can think of it as new field. Because what this NF function is going to do is actually bring back a specific field in our database. The GL, that stands for General Ledger. We're going to get balance, budget, credits, debits for various accounts, date ranges, companies, all that good stuff. And the last one is our NP. NP you can think of as your no problem tool. It's technically called the Navision Poly tool because it has everything that we couldn't really stick anywhere else we shoved in there. I call it my Swiss Army knife. You know, it's got a pair of scissors, a little knife, a magnifying glass, a toothpick. It's got all these things that don't really belong anywhere else, so you just shove them on your Swiss Army knife, and you break it out when you have these random little things you need to do. We'll talk a little bit about the NP, but we're going to focus mostly on the NL and the NF. Okay? And then we'll talk about the GL on day 3. We will do a little bit with NP, and if we have time on day 3, we can break out some of more functions in NP, but it's a little bit more advanced training. And I found that if I try and shove that down your brain by day 3, everybody's brain is mush, and it's just a little bit too much. So, what is JET? It's basically an Excel tool that allows us to create something that's like the JET-FX. Okay? You enter in your various parameters. When you hit OK, it puts in your function into Excel. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll be able to read and understand what this is supposed to be doing. Hopefully. We will then run a report. It pings our database and brings back, hopefully, the correct answer. If we've done everything correct, it should bring back the correct answer. Now, I've had instances where it brings back the wrong answer. We've done everything right. We found that sometimes that's because there's bad data in the database. Somebody made a mistake along the way. Hopefully, if everything's good, we're going to get the right information. Now, our JFX that we're going to use, it's our JET function wizard, is going to look different than this. This is actually from version 2009, and I petitioned to say, shouldn't we update this to look like our new one? And they say, no, we want it to look like the Excel FX tool. That's the whole point. It hasn't looked like that for about 5 years. Maybe we should update that. As we go through and we talk about JET, we'll kind of focus on everybody here is going to be a designer. We need to understand what that means, because that sometimes I'm going to say, well, a viewer. What does that mean? Well, designers are the people that have all the rights and the privileges within Jet. You get to design reports, you can modify reports, you get to do all that stuff, but that means if somebody wants a report, they got to come to one of you. If they want to change to a report, they've got to come to one of you. Because a viewer can refresh a report, they can look at a report, and if we have, as designers have deemed them worthy, we'll allow them to change a couple things. And that's where our report options come in. You want to be able to change this and change that?
Yeah. I'm sorry, just real quick. So can the viewer view, I think yesterday I was a little confused on this, can they pull real data, real-time data in there? Because I thought, okay.
Yeah, as long as they have a connection to the data source.
Okay,
Yeah, it's just going to refresh the report.
awesome.
So yes. And then we also include the Excel user. And the reason for that is if we've done our job right, we can save this file, our JET report, just save it as an Excel file and send it off to anybody. If they've got Excel, it's just going to look like a standard Excel file, but it's going to be pulling, it will have pulled real-time data when you ran the report, saved it, sent it off. Now, they won't be able to refresh that data because A, they won't have a connection to your database, hopefully you know the client set, and B, they won't have JET installed. Chances are they won't even know what the heck JET reports is. You know, that's a common thing that I get is, I never heard of JET reports until this. I was the same way. I had no idea JET reports existed until they called me up and said, hey, you interested in a job? I said, sure. So now that we kind of have that concept, let's talk about Excel functions and formulas. Again, this is something we probably should have covered yesterday, and I believe you did. Which is a function, which is a formula?
Formulas and functions and all right.
Correct. Right, a function is something that has typically some sort of text, and then we pass in some parameters. You know, I have a web design and a coding background, so I see this and I say, yeah, this is the subtotal program. You pass in these parameters, it calls that little function, and brings back the answer, and then it tells you what it is. Formulas, on the other hand, are just simple math. Look at this, plus this, times that. Just simple mathematics. So let's pull up Excel real quick. And I'm going to just kind of go through the toolbar up here real quick, just kind of talk about some of these things. We are going to cover a lot of these, so I'm going to kind of gloss over some of these things. In fact, let me... Which version of Excel? I didn't actually see, or not Excel, Jet are you guys using? Do you see the JFX with 4 different buttons, or is that one button?
Yeah,
4
different.
Okay, fantastic. You're on a newer version. So some of these I actually have modified. One of the nice things with the new version of Jet is if you find yourself not using certain buttons, we can just hide them. Okay. By default, there's actually a wizard that's hidden. It's called the Report Builder. The reason for that is it's a dinosaur, it's dying, and it will be removed probably in the next year. So our dev team has just decided, you know what, let's just hide it for right now, and those of you who want to use it, or people that are familiar with it, I don't teach it. For that reason, A, it's dying, and B, it's a very, very clunky tool. You know how to build a report, there's no reason to ever go into the report builder. So your browser, or your Jet ribbon may look a little bit different than mine, but trust me, you can always add the buttons, or if we say, you know what, I've got this button, what does it do? Okay. So the first thing we want to talk about is our 2 types of modes. We have design mode and report mode. Design mode is where we're going to do all the designing of our report. Makes sense. But that means a designer is the only person who has access to design. Right? Viewers can't design reports, so therefore they can't have access to design mode. Report mode is where we run the report. That's the only mode that viewers have access to. So when you want to run a report, you go ahead and hit report. Well, I have nothing there, so nothing happened. But then we've got this refresh button right next to it. Report and refresh do the same thing. They run the report, but they do it 2 different ways. When we hit report, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to go to a local cache and say, have I run this report since it's been open? That's the important thing to know. Since I've opened this up, have I run this yet? If it has, it stores all that information locally in that cache. and I hit report and it says, hey, you've already run this report 15 minutes ago? Well, here you go. It's the same information. Refresh will ignore that local cache, and it will go out to the database every single time. Well, why wouldn't we want that? Well, as a designer, if we create a report, it's a really massive report, I run it and I need to make a change to it, I'm going to have to go back into design mode, make those changes. If I hit report, it's going to go to that local cache and say, well, I've answered 99% of your questions already. That one question that you modified, I'm just going to run that one query. So it's going to run much faster. Anything that's dependent on that one query will get updated as well. Refresh will rerun the whole report. So if your report takes 10, 15 minutes to run, and you make one little change, do you really want to sit there and twiddle your thumb for 15, 20 minutes while you run this report? Probably not. Hopefully we're going to build reports that run much quicker than 15, 20 minutes, but I have heard instances of people building these really massive reports, and they just take a long time to run. You know, I have people contact me all the time and say, my report's running really slow, what can I do about it? And I look at it and say, oh, you can do this and this and this and this, and that will improve the speed. Or sometimes you look at it and say, there's nothing you can do. Do you really need to pull 7 years worth